Hey, you ever get that feeling there's something in the dark watching you? If you're like me, you can't look away. That's why I want to tell you about Creepy Shit. It's the podcast that dives into the strange, the haunted, the downright unholy, true crime that never got answers, folklore that refuses to die, and stories that cling to you long after you're done listening. Every week, you're invited to sit by the fire with the rest of us creepers and hear something you'll want to share in a hushed voice. So if you're ready to explore things that might go bump in the night and things that don't make a sound at all, subscribe to Creepy Shit Podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Join us. We've been waiting for you.
Research and recording of Canadian creepies happens on the shared land and traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe peoples, many of whom continue to live and work here today. This territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties. A key treaty governing this territory is the Dish with One Spoon Agreement. This treaty between the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, and Haudenosaunee people binds them to share and protect the land. Subsequent Indigenous nations and peoples, settlers, and all newcomers have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. We all share the responsibility of ensuring the dish is never empty, meaning we must take care of the land and the creatures we share it with.
Welcome, wanderers, to journey down the crooked path, a place where the stories are stranger, the shadows stretch longer, and the things that go bump in the night might just be listening. I'm Amanda Joy, your guide into the eerie, the forgotten, and the downright bizarre. Here, we step off the well-lit roads of Canadian creepies and venture into the murky corners of history, folklore, and the unexplained, where the whispers grow louder and the truth is never quite what it seems. So let's take a deep breath, watch your step, and whatever you do, don't look back. Once you start down the crooked path, you never know what might follow.
People in small towns love a good story, especially the old kinds, the ones that sound like they came from someone's grandfather, but nobody can actually agree who said it first. Honoré has a few of those, but none get repeated more than the one about Macloune. It's said that he was born with a cleft palate, a malformed jaw, and seizures that started before he could even walk. His mother, Marie Anne, tried to keep him fed and warm in a house that barely held heat. The neighbors said that they felt sorry for her, but they still stood around telling each other he looked that way because a drunk woman once yelled about curses in the middle of the street. This is a story that mixes superstition with poverty, and good intentions don't stop anything bad from happening. And you can see all of that in Beaugrand's 1904 account, and it's the version that we're stepping into tonight. Honoré Beaugrand was born in Saint Joseph de Honoré in 1848. He moved through a lot of roles in his lifetime: military service when he was young, then journalism, politics, and eventually writing. He ran newspapers, held office, and kept collecting stories that he grew up hearing in rural Quebec. By the early 1890s, his health wasn't holding up, so he stepped away from politics. He spent the next several years traveling through the Mediterranean, the American Southwest, and parts of Asia. He wrote during those trips, and some of those works would later become published. In 1900, he released a French-language collection called Les Chassés-Galeries Légendes Canadiens, Le Loup-garou and La Pierre Louison. That book is still considered one of the major pieces of French-Canadian literature. That same year, he put out another English-language collection for readers who didn't speak French. This included English versions of some of those same stories and a piece called Les Coyettes de l'Enfant Jesus. In 1904, he published New Studies of Canadian Folklore, written in English. It opened with a foreword by William Lighthall and included chapters on goblin stories from French Canada, an English version of Macloune, and a section on Indigenous picture writing, as well as pieces of legends from the North Pacific. Beaugrand died in 1906, but the work he left behind remains one of the cleanest looks at stories people told in Quebec during his lifetime. This story has been translated into English. The phrasing may not be as close to what Beaugrand's original is, and if you're looking for something that more closely resembles his original, check out an anonymous version on the Mysteries of Canada website. Although his name at baptism was Maxime, everyone in the village called him Macloune. His mother, Marie, had trouble saying his name clearly, and that was the way she pronounced it, and the villagers repeated it. He grew up deeply in poverty. It was the only life he knew, and it followed him from childhood into adulthood. His father worked as a boatman and drowned when Macloune was just a young baby. After that, his mother did whatever she could to keep them alive. She took work wherever anyone would have her and tried to care for the child who had been sickly from birth with rickets. The neighbors didn't think he would survive, but he did. The boy was considered an ugly monster in his village. His body was badly deformed, with long arms and long, thin legs that ended at hands and feet that barely looked human. He was bow-legged, crippled, and hunchbacked, and people said that he looked more like an animal than he did a child. His jaw had never properly developed, and 2 long yellow teeth stuck out from a small opening that served as his mouth. He couldn't chew his food well, and people watched him eat just out of curiosity. His speech was made up of broken phrases and inarticulate sounds, which he matched with exaggerated gestures that some found almost comical. Even so, he usually managed to make himself understood, even by people who were meeting him for the very first time. In spite of how he looked, and no matter how hard it was for him to speak, Macloune was adored by his mother and cared for by the whole village. People said that he was as good as he was ugly. He had large blue eyes that fixed on you in a way that seemed to say he knew exactly how he appeared, and that he was still the only support his mother had. As poor as he was, he worked because she depended on him. Not even the roughest boys in the village would ever dare mock him or take advantage of his weakness. The villagers also pitied him because they believed an old woman had put a spell on Marie months before Macloune was born. She was an indigenous basket maker who drank heavily whenever she had enough coins for a bottle, and her drunken outbursts were remembered by anyone who had seen them. She would wander through the streets, screaming, pulling at her hair, and frightening away anyone nearby. During one of these episodes, she tried to force her way into Marie's small house. Marie, terrified and alone, refused to let her in, and the woman cursed her from the doorway. People in the village said that the curse was the reason for Macloune's deformities. They also whispered, although less confidently, that a beggar from St. Michael de Yamaska, who had a reputation for sorcery, had put another spell on her. She had nothing to give him when he asked for money during her recovery after Macloune's birth, and some believed that he had taken offense. Macloune had grown up working and helping wherever he could. He was always ready to run an errand or lend a hand when someone needed it. He had never been to school, and it wasn't until he was 13 or 14 that the village cure finally allowed him to make his first communion. Now, he wasn't what people would call a simpleton, but his mind had never been trained, and he had very little chance to develop it. By the time he was 10, he was already helping his mother keep food on the table and gather firewood for the winter. He spent long hours on the shore of St. Lawrence, picking up branches that had drifted in from the current. Macloune learned early how to barter. His biggest thrill was going to Montreal to buy small things that he could resell, like thread, needles, and buttons. He carried them in a basket with fruit and candies and peddled them around the village. For a while, the little family had no misery, but the poor boy hadn't counted on the illness that had begun to take hold of his already worn and fragile body. Macloune was brave, and there were very few days when he wasn't seen at the wharf or at the landing spots for the market boats or standing around before and after High Mass every Sunday and holidays. On long summer evenings, he would often go out fishing on the river, and he had become skilled at handling a small boat, whether he was rowing or using a sail when the wind was right. During the strongest northeast winds, people often saw him alone on his boat, his hair blown back, and headed down the river. When strawberries, raspberries, and blueberries were in season, he set up a small business that earned him some good money. He bought fruit from the villagers and resold it at the markets in Montreal. It was around this time that he met a poor girl who bought her blueberries from the opposite shore where she lived in the concession of La Petite Miserie. Meeting that poor girl changed Macloune's whole life. It was the first time he ever dared look at a woman with any kind of hope, and he fell for her hard. The girl's name was Marie Joyelle. She wasn't rich or beautiful. She was an orphan, thin and sickly, worn down by work. An uncle had taken her out of charity, and he made her work like a servant in exchange for a few coins and cast-off clothing that barely covered her. A small shawl with black and red checks was all that she had to cover her head and her shoulders. The first sign of affection Macloune ever showed her was a pair of store-bought shoes and a flowered dress that he bought back from Montreal. He offered them shyly in his broken way. "Dress, mademoiselle? Shoes, mademoiselle? Moncler buy these for you? You take, hey?" And Marie-Joëlle accepted them quietly, moved by the look of absolute devotion on his face. This was the first time that Marie-Chiette, as everyone called her, had ever been given something that wasn't handed to her out of pity. She understood Macloune right away, and without worrying about his appearance or his broken speech, she was deeply moved. From that moment on, Macloune and Marie-Chiette loved each other with the kind of intensity that people have at 18, forgetting that nature had set them apart and that marriage wasn't something that they were supposed to ever think about. In his innocence, Macloune told his mother everything, and old Marie found it perfectly natural that her son had chosen a girlfriend and was thinking about marriage. The whole village knew about it soon enough because the next Sunday, Macloune left early in his boat to go to La Petite Meuse and ask Marie-Chiette to come with him to High Mass at Honoré. She agreed without hesitation, finding the request completely natural since she had already accepted him as her companion when she took his gifts. Marie-Chiette brought out her best clothes for the occasion. She put on her flowered dress and her store-bought shoes. All she lacked was one of those feathered hats that all the girls in Honoré wore, and she could have imagined herself a young lady of fashion. Her uncle, who had taken her in, was a poor man with too many mouths to feed, and he was more than willing to marry her off to the first man who asked. As far as he was concerned, Macloune was as good a match as any. They caused a bit of a stir in the village when the third bell rang for High Mass, and Macloune appeared with Marie-Chiette on his arm. Everyone cared too much for the boy to laugh at his face, but people still turned their heads to hide their smiles that they couldn't quite hold back. Both of them walked into church without paying attention to anyone watching, and walked straight up to the main aisle, to the wooden benches reserved for the poor of the parish. There, without once turning or worrying about the impression they made, they listened to the Mass with complete devotion.
You. Yeah, you. Still haunting the same old fast fashion? Time to dig up something better with Back from the Dead Goods, a Canadian small business where forgotten threads get a second life and sustainability meets spooky. This isn't just upcycled clothing, it's resurrected fashion with an eerie edge. Handpicked, reworked, and revived, every piece is as unique as a ghost story whispered at midnight. And because you're a part of the Canadian Creepies family, you get an exclusive deal. Use code Canadian Creepies at checkout for 10% off. Find them lurking on Instagram, Etsy, and Poshmark. Links are in the episode description. Give your wardrobe a second chance at life, if you dare. Looking for your next obsession? The Creators Collective Podcasts is your gateway to the dark, the chilling, and the downright fascinating. We're a community of independent podcasts with one goal: to share the best in true crime, paranormal tales, folklore, and unexplained mysteries. Whether you crave cold cases that won't stay closed, haunted histories that refuse to be forgotten, or stories that make you sleep with the lights on, there's a show waiting for you in the collective. And when you join us, you're not just listening to one podcast. You're stepping into a world of creators who love this stuff as much as you do. Check out the Creators Collective today. Follow the link in our show notes to discover your next favorite podcast. We'll be waiting for you. Let's take a moment during this break to talk about something that matters. Something that doesn't get to be background noise. The Anishinaabe-Moan word, Ni-ki-na-gana, means we are all related, and we are. But relationship isn't just about words, it's about responsibility. Canadian author Naomi Klein once said, "It is not enough to say that we live on Indigenous land. We have to act as if we do." And one way to do that is by supporting Pay Your Rent, a grassroots mutual aid initiative that offers direct material support to Indigenous organizers across this land. It's not charity, it's rent. For those of us who aren't Indigenous to this place, it's a way to show up differently, to redistribute some of what's been taken. The Pay Your Rent Fund started as a one-time request for help in 2018 and grew into a nonprofit called Ni-ki-na-gana. Your monthly or one-time donation can help provide food, hygiene supplies, housing support, and resources for Indigenous-led resistance and community care. So if you've ever said, we're all related, ask yourself, are you being a good relative? Visit payyourrent.ca and find out more about how you can be part of something better. Now, back to this case.
They left church the exact same way that they had entered, walking calmly as if they were alone in the world, and headed straight to Marie's house, where Sunday dinner was waiting for them. Macloune has a sweetheart now. Macloune wants to get married. Macloune is keeping company with Marie Chiette. That was the talk spreading through the crowd, as always gathered after High Mass to gossip about the week's events. He's a brave, honest boy, people said. But it makes no sense for someone who looks like an ape to think about marriage. That was the verdict. The doctor, who was a bachelor and ate with the cure every Sunday, mentioned it during the meal, and the two of them agreed that the marriage had to be stopped at any cost. He believed it would be a crime to let Macloune, sick and crippled and rickety and deformed as he was, become the father of children who would be condemned from birth to physical and intellectual weaknesses. There was no rush, they said. They could stop it later, when the bans were posted in the church. And besides, was this even a serious marriage? Macloune rarely spoke unless his little business forced him to, and had no idea that people were plotting against his happiness. He went about his work as usual, and every evening at dusk, when the village had gone quiet, he took his boat and crossed to La Petite Miserie to meet Marie Chiette, who waited for him on the shore. As poor as he was, he always found something small to bring her: a bit of ribbon, a cotton handkerchief, a piece of fruit, a candy someone had given him and he had saved. He always brought wildflowers he picked in the fields and along the roadsides, and he offered them with the same greeting. Bonjour, ma Chiette, Macloune. And this was all their conversation. They seated themselves on the side of the skiff which Macloune had drawn up onto the beach, and they waited there sometimes during an entire hour, until the moment when a voice from the house came. Marie Chiette, oh Marie Chiette. Bonsoir, Miss Chiette. Ah, Macloune. Macloune, crippled and shy, pulled a small white cardboard box from his pocket. Inside was a modest gold ring. He slid it onto her finger. Us two? Married at St. Michael's? Eh, Marie Chiette? Macloune, whatever you wish. Two outcasts gave each other a single chaste kiss. That was all. Marriage was said for Michaelmas, and the only thing left was to post the banns at the church. The families agreed to the match, and there was no need to see a notary for a contract. They would be starting their lives together in poverty with no inheritance, no dowry, and nothing to divide. The next day, at 4 p.m, Macloune put on his Sunday clothes, and he walked to the presbytery, where he found the cure in the garden pacing the paths and reciting his breviary. Bonjour, Maxime. The cure was the only person in the village who called him by his real name. Bonjour, monsieur cure. I hear, Maxime, that you intend to marry. Yes, monsieur cure. With Marie Chiette Joyelle? Yes, monsieur. It must not be for consideration, my poor Maxime. You have no means to support a wife, and your poor mother? What would become of her without you to give her bread? Macloune had never imagined that there could be obstacles to his marriage. He looked at the cure with a hopeless, stunned expression, the way that a dog looks at its master when it's struck and cannot understand why. No, my poor Maxime, this must not be thought of. You are too weak, sickly. You must wait until you are of age. Macloune was too stunned to answer. His respect for the cure would have kept him silent anyways, but a sob rose in his throat and choked him, making it impossible for him to speak at all. All he understood was that they were going to stop him from marrying Marie Chiette. In his simple, trusting way, he took the cure's word as final. He gave the priest one long look of reproach, as if the man had taken his happiness from him. And without thinking to question the judgment that struck him so hard, he ran towards the beach, He followed the shoreline home, trying to avoid the villagers who might see him crying. He threw himself into the arms of his mother, though she had no idea what had happened. The unhappy cripple sobbed for an hour, and to all her repeated questions, he could only say, "Monsieur won't let me marry Marichiette. Me die, ma mama." The poor woman tried to comfort him in her rough, unpolished way, but it did nothing. She decided that she would go to the cure herself and explain. She couldn't understand why anyone would want to stop her son from marrying the girl that he loved. Macloune was inconsolable. He wouldn't touch his supper, and as soon as the darkness settled in, he grabbed his paddle and headed for the beach, clearly intent on crossing it to La Petite Miserie to see Marichiette. His mother tried to stop him. The sky was heavy and the air was cold. The clouds, thick, were piling in the horizon. Rain was coming, maybe strong winds too. But Macloune didn't listen, or didn't seem to understand. He kissed her hard, held her tight, and then jumped into his skiff and disappeared into the dark. Marichiette was waiting for him on the shore in their usual place. The darkness kept her from seeing how wild and exhausted he looked. She stepped towards him with her usual greeting. "Bonjour, Marichiette," grabbed her and held her against him, shaking, and tried to speak. What came out were broken, frantic phrases, cut apart by sobs that tore out of him. "Thou knowest, Marichiette, Monsieur Cure wants us not to marry. Too poor, us. Too ugly, me. Too ugly. Too ugly to marry thee. Me wish not, want to live. Me want to die." And poor Marichiette, understanding the blow that had fallen on them, let her tears mix with his sobs and broken cries. They wept together in the dark night, paying no attention to the rain that had begun to fall in sheets, or the cold north wind moaning through the tall poplars along the bank. Hours passed. The rain kept pouring. The great river, torn by the storm, was white with foam, and the waves rolling far up the beach, sometimes washing over the feet of the two lovers as they clung to each other, crying and murmuring their grief, were soaked through. They felt nothing, though, beyond their despair. They had neither understanding to talk through what had happened, nor the strength to shake off the numbness that had taken hold of them. They stayed like that through the whole night, and it was only at the first hint of dawn that they finally let go of each other in one last shaking embrace. They were both trembling. The thin rags that they wore around them almost gave no protection from the north wind, which was now blowing into a full storm. Whether it was a presentiment or just despair, they said to each other, "Adieu, Macloune. Adieu, Marichiette." Poor girl, soaked through and numb to the bone, her teeth chattering, went back to her uncle's house where no one had noticed she was gone. Macloune pushed his skiff into the surf and headed towards Honoré, the wind against him, and he had to use all of his skill to keep the little boat from being swallowed by the heavy waves. It took him 2 hours of constant effort to reach the opposite shore. He had spent the entire night in mortal worry, and when he came in, he collapsed onto the bed, exhausted and shaking, his face burning with fever. Everything poor Marie tried to warn him did nothing. The priest came around 9 in the morning. He said Macloune had an inflammation of the lungs and that they needed to send for a priest at once. The good cure brought the sacrament to the boy who was dying. Macloune moaned in his delirium, stammering words that no one could understand. At moments, he recognized the priest praying beside him, and he died looking at him with gentle reproach and a hopefulness that could not be expressed, murmuring Marichette's name. A month later, at Michaelmas, Marichette Joyelle was brought to the cemetery. She had died of consumption at her uncle's house in La Petite Miserie. Poor outcast from life, from happiness, and from love, had not even been granted the mournful privilege of lying together in death, under the same mound, in some forgotten corner in the same churchyard.